All right, Mike, I'm going to attempt to explain scleral toricity and how to evaluate a toric scleral contact lens on a patient's eye. So this is a Zen lens. I don't really fit Zen lens anymore, but to illustrate its toricity, I want to say the dot indicates the steeper meridian, whereas 45 degrees away where the toric markers are would be the flatter meridian. So let's look at a couple of patients' scleral profiles to predict where the dot is going to land when you put it on the patient. So let's say I insert the scleral contact lens with the dot at 6 o'clock, okay? If we look at the sclera, now forget about the cornea, forget about it. It doesn't matter when you're putting a scleral contact lens on. If you look at the sclera adjacent to the cornea, you see how the base curve would be like 6.84, whereas down here it's much steeper, 6.04. Well, this patient's scleral contact lens is probably, the dot is probably gonna stay at 6 o'clock because it's very steep right here. And so if I look at the scleral profile function on here, that is the case. Okay, so the steeper meridian, is the basically the vertical right here. And remember, it just doesn't matter about the cornea. We're talking about the sclera. Now let's look at this sclera. So notice how the flatter part of the adjacent sclera is here, okay? So 6.22. And if I go 45 degrees away, we're looking at a 5.89. So, I would predict that the dot is probably gonna be, at 4 or 5 o'clock. So if you look at the scleral profile, yes, that'll be the case. The dot will probably rotate over here. So let's say the dot is at, for simplicity, let's just say 4 o'clock. And you see edge lift over here. Because let's say there's a pinguicula. The lab, if you report the dot being at 4 o'clock, they're gonna know to make the change here. Whereas if the dot were at 6 o'clock, that change would end up being somewhere up here, okay? But you're reporting it at 4 o'clock so that they know to make the change here relative to the dot. The same thing goes for over refraction. Now, if you have a good fitting toric scleral contact lens, then usually you're just gonna have a spherical over refraction because that scleral, is perfectly round in the cornea. So usually it's just spherical. If you have a poorly fitting lens, or if the patient's cornea is just that jacked up, then you may have a cylindrical over refraction. And so let's say you report the dot to be at 4 o'clock. The lab will now know where to put the front toric, okay, in relation to the patient's over refraction. So really the dot is just to help you communicate with the lab, where to make changes on the haptics, or, to the prescription of the contact lens.